Hey dudes, welcome back to another episode of our Rhomas Men's Team podcast. You are about to listen to one of our prior team meetings. If you ever want to join one of our live sessions that we have every Monday and Friday, head over to rhomas.com. That's RHOMAS.com and put your email in and we will send you a live link every time we record. We generally record on Mondays and Fridays. So if you ever want to be on the actual podcast, like we bring men up all the time to talk about their goals, talk about their obstacles, etc., head over to rhomas.com. And then also, if you want to help support the channel grow and also have access to exclusive content, book reviews, extra whiteboard sessions, etc., and some coaching sessions, head over to patreon.com and support us. We would love it. But if not, no biggie. We'll see you on the live sessions. Later, dudes. Enjoy this podcast. Mr. Matthew J. McCusker, what's up, man?
What's up, Wes? What's going on, dude?
How you doing?
Good.
Awesome. So let's just jump right into it. My mom always says I'm like super terrible at small talk, so I should probably just go with my grain and not create the small talk.
I like talk. I don't know why people give talking about the weather a bad name. I think it's a nice thing to do. I think it's important to talk about, and I think it's very. People act like it's not a thing that matters at all. It's very important to touch base with strangers about the weather. I think, at least.
No, dude, I completely agree with you. My hunch is, you've read the book, what is it called? Please Understand Me Too. Did you, we've talked about it a lot. So I actually think it's a character flaw of mine to not talk about the weather, because it's kind of a gateway drug or an intro into, it's a way of like dipping your toe into the water when you're talking with somebody. I have to fight against my natural DNA, it feels like, to create small talk. I wish I was good at it.
I don't do it out of any kind of good like person. I just am like, if I'm sitting next to a person and we look at each other, I just get anxious and I'm like, shit, we gotta talk now, I guess. So I'm like, it's nice out. It's not out of any like want to connect out of my end. It's just like a social anxiety response.
Well, have you ever, and I've done this often, and not for any, at this point, it's more of like I can kind of reflect on the anecdotal data. My propensity to just jump in and ask a complete stranger about what they're passionate about, within the scope of 3 minutes, is probably terribly socially violating to them initially. Because it feels that way. You can actually kind of see their response. It's like, what the hell is this guy even? Why is he at? Like in the airport, I often ask it. But it's amazing how quickly they get over that, like, what is this guy talking about? And then just boom, like go into it. And all of a sudden you're immersed inside of what now is, let's say, a 25-minute conversation about how they're super passionate about like their dog grooming business and why. Mm-hmm. And so I think I get a bit of reward from that, which doesn't help me overcome the flaw of not being willing or, what I would define as almost able to have the small talk conversations.
No, I would side with you on that. If you're the only problem not having small talk would be if you don't talk to anybody. But if you cut right to the chase with people, I mean, I think any kind of small talk thing is waived, because that's the point of small talk, is to get to the larger talk.
Right.
So I support going head in. I like that better. I'm gonna start doing that then.
Dude, try it. No, I'm serious. Like, and specifically, I have found that question to be the most intriguing to people. Is literally just like, what are you passionate about? And then always, depending on how well you know the person, if you don't know the person at all, you will get a very similar look, I assume, that I always get with it. But then you can kind of use your skill to kind of say like, hey, I'm not some weirdo. Like, it's like, no, I'm just interested if you ask that. And then all of a sudden you're boom, like you're in a at least a 30-minute conversation with somebody about what they're super passionate about. And the funny thing is, man, like, think about how many people you talk to. You could even ask that question to people who you've known for years, and all of a sudden learn something from them. At least that's what I have found.
Yeah. I mean, even if I like, that's a question I'll get like immediately. If someone asked me, I'd get immediately nervous. I'd be like, I don't know. But I mean, I can think of things. I feel like I have a lot like diverse changing interests that are kind of cyclical. So it's kind of like tough. Yeah. Someone's like, what are you passionate about? I'm like, I don't know. Like right now I'm really into this thing. It'll change and I'll be into this thing. But I'd say there's been mainstays that are like, I would say writing, reading, and what else? Yeah, I would say reading and writing and kind of like psychological introspection kind of exploration. That there have been my three top mainstays.
Well, that's actually a good. Now that I think about it, you might, you might force me to change my question, which is, what have you been consistently passionate about? Because that is an interesting dynamic of a question.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too, because I've got that from observing my dad who, like, I remember he got into like rollerblading for a while and like hurt his elbow, which was hilarious to see.
And I know Matt's dad personally. That's you can't not you can't not laugh at that visual of him on rollerblades
He's
and
like
like knee pads, elbow pads, and like the wrist guards and a
I don't think he
helmet.
was wearing any sort of PPE because he hurt his elbow pretty badly. But yeah, because he was like a kind of a hobby spaz where he would jump back and forth between like this and that and this and that. But over the span of time, I've been like, okay, he likes fishing, and generally being in Florida is a hobby of his. If he just
Yeah,
can be within that state, he's happy.
yeah.
But yeah, it is funny watching, and I think a lot of my dad's side has this weird frenetic kind of activity where it's like you have a thing, you're like, "Oh, this is cool," and you just kind of suck the life out of activities. It's kind of weird. I think it's like an ADD thing.
Well, I'm not sure if we both read. I read the book called what is it called? Oh man, Brain Rules. Did you read Brain Rules?
No.
Oh, dude. Well, in there, it talked about a topic of, I think it's, and don't quote me on this, but I think it's like 95% of ADD cases, and again, don't quote me, but I think it's a severe percentage of ADD cases are male.
Mm.
And this, I think, I forget what he was, some sort of neuroscientist. It's a phenomenal book, like absolutely phenomenal book. And he talks about, the reason for that is because males in our genetics is to move around. Like we were hunters,
Hmm.
so ingrained in that is movement. And then when you, obviously, and a lot of people heard this argument, then when you take that male and you sit him down in a classroom for 6 7 8 hours a day, or in an office for 6 7 8 9 10 hours a day, all of a sudden, yeah, you might think he has ADD, but that's just called him being a natural male, is like going out and roaming and hunting, like that sort of thing. So I wonder if that
Yeah.
has anything to do with it.
No, I do. I don't, like I said, I've always kind of been skeptical against like the medical diagnosis of ADD because
Mm,
I think it's funny. I'm reading a book right now called The Shallows. It's really good. It's how I think the book overall is about how like the internet and technology is changing our brains.
mm,
Um, and they start with a bunch of stuff, but they eventually get to when we switch from the oral tradition to like written media,
yeah,
and just the like reading alone wired our brains. Like you were saying, we all had ADD because you needed to have ADD because you had to react in real time to like flittering sensory information. If something kind of moved, you had to look, and like, you couldn't not look. Like if you're in class and someone's messing around, you look, the teacher will be like, "Hey, what are you doing? Focus your attention." A lot of that came from reading, because in order to read, you have to sit and against your nature,
right.
focus on a singular thing, minus all the stuff buzzing about you. So they were saying how we used to have the oral tradition where we would just kind of like, you contained all of the information you could possibly contain, and that was it. And then people started reading, and it was like kind of looked at like, and people started using, like when they got good at computers, people like nerd. You were considered
Yeah,
like a nerd just to
right.
write or read. You're like, I think there was like Plato and Socrates was, all about just like, you would just wear like a bed sheet and just stand around all day and be like, check out all this stuff I know. And you could just do it every day because no
Yeah,
one, unless they could store that in their brain, you had that.
right.
So they eventually, when people started writing, the younger people were like, no, writing's pretty cool. You write stuff and read stuff. You can like save information. It's so funny to
Mm,
think of it that way. But there was something that really made me laugh when people first started reading books, it wasn't even a book. They used to just like, people first started writing, they would just, like we do with like, if you're like, you write on napkins, you would have like a broken clay pot and you would just like write little characters on it. And like, all right, I know how many beans I have. Let me store that over here. And then it
mm,
kind of evolved where they started doing scrolls, and then they started taking wax tablets and like scratching in them, and then making like an actual book. They called like a codex back then, of just,
mm,
it would be a stack of wax tablets that you could flip through, and they'd have like numbered pages and everything. This is thousands of years ago. But when they first came out, because we were so used to talking, there was no spaces between the words or anything. It was just, you had a
Oh,
glob of
interesting.
text that you were supposed to read aloud. You were supposed to open it and read it out loud to yourself. Like if you silently read, people thought you were a weirdo.
Interesting.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? And then it created a neurological change in our brain to be able to sit down and interact with like other people's intimate thoughts in real time and digest them and spit them back. Like it changed our brains, which is insane. And then if you think about that, I don't even want to think about what computers are doing to us.
Well, so in terms of changing your brain, you know, because it's I love what Jordan Peterson said. And he said, you know, writing is thinking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so and it dovetails into what you were saying, like capturing thoughts. It's just pretty wild to think that we can actually do that. You know, and if you've ever watched it, you know, anybody who's ever watched a documentary on evolution sees how that's one of the main factors that allows our species to advance versus, you know, dogs, other animals, etc.
Sure.
When you talk about sort of the evolution of the brain and certain things not being natural, you know, have you found, because I know I certainly have, that things like meditation make us almost, I hate even using this terminology, but almost adapt us at a quicker pace to handle kind of a new world of handling information? Like, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Oh, big time. I think, well, I think it's almost like, I think meditation now is a correction to the way, if we weren't doing that and just kind of going along with the stream of like, you know, social media and just like looking at cell phone activity. I think
Yeah.
meditation is kind of a buttress against that, because if you don't consciously take time to separate yourself from the torrent of, you know, and I would say largely pointless information and activity of like, you know, gaining, I mean, again, you can monetize, you have a huge social media following, but for the most part, people are just consumers of it, staring at it, and just kind of passively entertaining themselves through this, whatever, you know, posting pictures and getting that buzz off of getting likes is.
Mm.
So I think meditation is kind of like a pushback against like being able to take your brain out of like what I feel like is we're being pulled towards participating in all these different phone activities, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I
How do
use
you,
meditation to pull myself out of that, because I don't think it's bad necessarily. Like I'm not like, when I say it changed our brains, I'm not like for the worse. I think it's it's for the better. We can read and stuff. But then like, so you think about, you know, how, and it definitely, we form neural connections in order to read and, you know, interact with text. Then you think about TV and it's like that changed our brains in order to
oh
go
yeah.
from reading to passively accepting just images flittering back and forth. It's like, I don't know what that did to our attention spans. It's like, cause it's happening to everybody at once. So no one can really tell. That's my problem with like the overuse of phone stuff. We're all using it. So no one can really tell if we're changing or not, because we're all changing.
Oh, right. If you had to, if somebody were to ask you what the benefits of meditation were, or if you could summarize the benefits, because I want to give my answer after you, because I'm fascinated on this, because for a long time I avoided meditation only
Mhm.
because it landed in more of like a hippie type of camp. And
Yep.
as soon as something is described as that, like, oh, just do it because the spirits say you should do it, like I'm out. I'm
Sure.
done. Like I'm completely done. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but that doesn't go to a deep enough level of resolution as to why I should do it. So if you had to convince somebody about the benefits of it, or at least the summarizing of it, what would it be?
Well, so when I started doing it, my answer on that's changed over time. When I started doing it, the idea was to construct some sort of secure mental base in my mind that I could, no matter what was going on, I could ground myself in the moment and feel just secure, at peace, not caught up in, you know, the swirl of whatever was going on. Now, I think now the reason I do it is, well, two reasons. Well, two more reasons I would say, but the main reason I think what meditation lets people do is to interact with the automatic aspects of themselves. So it's like if you imagine like a hermit crab, like,
Mm.
you know, if you imagine like that part of yourself that like when all the lights are out, or when like, you know, you're not being constantly stimulated with information, when you sit in a dark room by yourself at night, you know, everyone has like thoughts that come before they go to sleep. So I
Right.
think meditation allows you to like let that innate part of yourself kind of creep out and you interact with that, if that makes sense.
Hmm. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So like if you were to, So if if you're sitting there talking to other people, you're reacting to the person you're talking to, and you're not like in a bad way, but you're modifying your thoughts and behavior to kind of match up with whoever you're talking to or whatever you're doing. If you were to
Mm,
sit by yourself in a dark room, there's nothing really guiding what's coming out of you other than your actual self. Unless you're like terrified of the dark, then you're just thinking about how scared you are of the dark. But
yep.
which I used to be when I was little.
Same.
But it's like there's parts of you that I
Reasonable.
think in quiet you need to interact with. It's like almost like in terms of having a relationship with yourself. It's like if you were like imagine having a roommate you never talked to, never really looked at, and like people are like, what's their deal? I'm like, no, no. That's how I
Mm.
feel like people kind of treat themselves a lot, where they don't ever take time to like actually see how you're thinking and feeling, and just kind of if you just shut everything off, what naturally comes up without you consciously trying to think of it. I'm kind of fascinated by that.
So, okay. So, and I want to make sure I'm hearing this correctly. So the benefit to you is actually during those times of silence where and don't let me put words in your mouth. I want to make sure
Mhm.
I'm hearing you right. During those meditative moments of silence that you are able to explore more areas of yourself. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And when I say areas of yourself, it's more of like more of the subconscious activity that you're not really thinking of
Mm.
because you're so bombarded and busy with what you're responding to rather than the more innate aspects of yourself that just emerge when left alone, which I think it's important. Otherwise, if you don't, my theory is if you're not in touch with those, they ooze out in your behaviors in ways that typically aren't the best.
Hmm. So is what you're saying that you have these sort of like, thoughts that are locked up in your subconscious. They're just locked away in a box somewhere. And during the meditative process, you're saying that those kind of you allow them to surface and you can deal with them in a way that you couldn't if you're out there with a whole bunch of other stimulus. Is that am I hearing
Mhm.
that correctly?
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think it's like, you can deal with them. I personally think I benefit from them.
Mm,
Like if you're like if you're doing any sort of like what would be called a creative endeavor where like
yeah.
there's just nothing and you have to create something and have it make sense and be good. And this, it's funny, I actually read, I think I told you about this yesterday or a couple days ago when we talked. Um, where, so, I wrote a book, I'm writing a book. I don't know what it's really about. I'm just
Mm,
writing. This stuff is just coming out of me from somewhere. Who knows?
right.
Um, then you hit a roadblock and you're like, damn, I don't know what to do. This doesn't make sense. This sucks. And you're putting all this concentrated effort consciously into this activity. And then you take a break and take a walk, and all of a sudden ideas just pop up out of nowhere. And you weren't even thinking about your book. You were thinking about your dog, and boom, something just pops out in your brain. That is more of what I'm talking about, like the kind of
Mm.
underlying subconscious activity going on in your brain.
And then what type of meditation, because from my understanding, I'm very much a novice at this. I've been doing it for probably, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, 2 years. So, but I'm very much a novice at it. What type of meditation do you do? Because it seems like there are a handful of different types.
Yeah. So yeah, I've always been hesitant to like go and get like real in depth in any certain like school of meditation just because I feel like I'll just distract myself with like there's transcendental meditation, something I've been kind of interested in, but I
You
just
want to do
don't
it
really
together?
feel like what.
You want to do it together?
Well, I'll do TM with you. Well,
Okay. Yeah.
the
I,
point,
I, I almost signed up for it a week and a half ago, but because of the coronavirus, yeah, they're not doing any meetings right now.
I've heard awesome stuff, and the idea of it is to literally to reach a transcendental state, which
Mm,
is something that's another thing I'm interested with meditation. That's when I started experimenting with what I call my THC cannabis deep dives.
okay.
Um, that's a whole different conversation, but
Yeah, we can go
that's,
down that rabbit hole too at some point. Definitely.
oh yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Like that's another thing too. It's like, you want to talk about automatic parts of yourself, ingest a heavy dose of THC and those are popping up. If you're like, oh, I don't
Mm.
believe in those, it's like, okay, eat this. And then you will believe in them. They come up, you can't fight them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like, the idea is like, can you in your mind while meditating reach a transcendental state to where you feel that's why when you get into this, people talk about, especially with any kind of meditation, feeling that like unity, like a unified feeling, like everything feels like it's the same thing and you don't feel all that separation between like self and other or self and
Yeah.
things. um and yeah, I don't know, and again, I'm like not really an expert in this, I'm just kind of interested in it, but that seems to be attainable no matter how you meditate. But that seems to be like the end process of meditating for me, at least from what I know. Again,
Yeah.
to reach a calm, and that's transcendental meditation, is to reach like a totally calm, peaceful state. David Lynch wrote a book called Catching the Big Fish, where he's a guy who did, I think, like Twin Peaks and a bunch of different like little art house movies. He has
Yeah.
a pretty big following, but he wrote a book called Catching the Big Fish, and that's his theory, that there's like bigger thoughts that lay at deeper levels of consciousness, and meditating helps you expand your consciousness so that you can access bigger, deeper thoughts.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because I've never thought about that, and I have not had that experience yet. I definitely have the experience where I think most people I've talked to have, where you're in the shower, like kind of like you were saying earlier, you're doing some sort of thing, mindless activity, and all of a sudden, boom, you get a great idea. I've definitely had that. I've never had it during meditation, and that's why I'm asking about the specific methodology you use, because I've tried what I know as of TM, but they're kind of secretive. And
Yeah.
I go back and forth on this stuff. I don't like when stuff gets so sort of religious and like almost cultish that it's like, no, you can't learn this thing. But at the same time, I'm a capitalist. So I understand it's like, hey, I created this thing, and, for me to incentivize me to keep it going, right? Like, you need to pay for that. So I totally get that as well.
Yeah.
But so for instance, I'm going to take a TM course. It'd be cool to go through it with you. But I've done what I've heard it is, which is, and I think even on their website, they say the same thing. So I'm not violating any, confidentiality stuff. Basically two times a day, 20 minutes per day. So one in the morning, one in the afternoon, of meditation, and what they call transcendental meditation, which is you're humming something or saying, or a mantra that apparently it's not even a word. It's just like a noise, like probably like the stereotypical, thing you would think of, like or something.
Yeah,
like
the
that.
OHM chant.
Right. Yeah, something like that.
Well, I've recently started experimenting with doing the Om while I meditate. I kind of like it. I like that as well. It just I had to get over sounding like oming in my basement because my floors are kind of thin. So my wife's right above me. I just meditate and just imagine her being like, what is he doing?
Right.
What a weirdo.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, and I've tried other, and I'm not going to say, well, actually, no. So I've done Headspace repeatedly, and I don't know what type of meditation they call it. It's probably more of like a mindfulness meditation where it's kind of sort of guided, and they walk you through it. And this is I'm not hating on Headspace at all. I think it's an outstanding service they provide to the community. But I can definitely say, like 100%, that when I was doing more transcendental meditation, again, I'm not an expert on that. I will take the course at some point, and I'll report back to people what I find. But that almost gave me like a superpower, and I hate even like saying that, because at the risk of sounding like I rub crystals together and stuff.
Yeah, I know you hate that. Which
man, I can't.
Gives me so much pleasure to hear you say that.
But I can tell you that when I was doing that repeatedly. Now, I've never done 2 sessions in a day, but I was consistently doing 20 minutes every single morning, and I was just making a noise in my head. And from my understanding, it's just like I read another book, and I forget what it's called at this point, but they did autopsies on humans who did meditation, and they had a cohort that did not do meditation. And they found that the people who did meditation had more gray matter in their prefrontal cortex. And the reasoning from this book, and I'll have to get the name for it of it sometime for you, but they said that basically what meditation does, or any standard practice where you just come back and you focus on something, it's the repeated focusing on something. The prefrontal cortex is what forces your brain to do that, right? It's the CEO of your mind. So you're strengthening that muscle just like you would strengthen a bicep. It's just the repeated repetition of getting back to a singular point. And it puts more blood flow there, and then eventually that gray matter grows. So if that's true, if that book was relaying accurate information, that's what convinced me to do it. And dude, I can tell you, within probably it wasn't immediate, but within a matter of, I would say, a week and a half, 2 weeks, the best way I could describe it, and this is going to sound insane, so at the risk of my reputation, is the way that humans have evolved to react to certain things, like you were saying earlier, had to be relatively immediate, right? I've got to be aware of all the surroundings because there might be a tiger under that bush over there who's about to pounce. So as soon as I hear a noise, I need to have a one-to-one mapping of stimulus and response. Or whatever, if a tip of an arrow is coming at me from a tribe, competitive tribe, if a tip of an arrow, well, I only see that dot in front of my face, but I need to move real quick.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the best way I can describe what transcendental meditation has done for me, if I'm practicing it right, is it's almost like the Matrix, right? Like it allows for me to stop, like literally have a pause, and for me to bend, and like everything freezes, and then that tip of the arrow, or at least what I perceive to be that tip of it, which is just a circle, right? If a tip of an arrow is coming at you, you just see a circle in front of your face.
Yeah.
But it allows me to pause and then to move around that. And it's like, oh, that's not a tip of an arrow. It's a ball. It's a ball that somebody's throwing to me for fun, right? It allows me to stop and freeze frame whatever's going on, and then to be able to analyze, hey, I'm about to react to this thing, but am I interpreting it in the right way? Right?
Yeah.
Like, is this thing coming at me, this comment that somebody just said to me, right? Is that really a spear that they're throwing at my chest, or is they're just joking with me? And at least transcendental meditation allowed me to freeze frame that stimulus. And it is, if I could convince people to do it, man, I mean, I don't know. I would almost say it's one of the most valuable practices that I've ever done, because, and for that reason, like, so I don't have the bubbling up of thoughts of like from deep down in the subconscious, but the benefit that I have noticed is it allows me to walk through life almost like Matrix style. And I'm a terrible person to talk about Matrix because I've never even seen it, but I think I know enough about it. Like I've seen enough
no,
trailers.
dude, I think you're 100% right. And I think it's also important too that people realize that there's no one standard response or benefit from it. It's a very individualized thing that helps people, like, in very individual ways. But it is funny that it is like, I mean, you're not doing nothing, but there's really nothing to it other than just concentrating, which is a very funny thing to even package and sell at all, which is like, sit down quietly and just repeat something to yourself, over and over and over and over. And it does have a profound effect. And what you were saying, because as you were saying what you're saying, I was like trying to think of like, what's an immediate benefit I could say in terms of just like practical benefit. And dude, it's exactly what you basically took it right out of my mouth, of like the Matrix thing of being able to slow down your reaction time. And I'm coming from, and I'm not really ashamed of it. I had for a while earlier this year, I started having horrible anger problems where I would like break shit, smash stuff, smash glasses. I broke my floor, which is Donkey Kong'd my floor with a mug.
You break a floor. That's pretty nasty. I like that.
The mug didn't break. My floor cracked, but tiny little divot. But dude, I was just like, didn't know how to, I'm in a marriage now. I have a kid on the way, and it's like, there's just things bottle up. And if you don't know how to I was in waters I just didn't know how to navigate. Once and if you lack the communication skills, all you're left with is just getting mad and doing whatever with it. But I will say meditating, and it always freaks people out when they say it, like, you broke stuff. It's like, yeah, I was smashing all kinds of shit. But
you name it, I've smashed it. It's just
dude, honestly, it's funny. So I'll say this. So I that's when I was like, I got to get this under wraps. And I've been able to, in the moment, like, especially I will just say for me personally, my big anger trigger is one of them. One of the main ones is dealing with my wife, I would say, of just like, I'm staying there quiet. She's right above me. Dealing with my wife. And it's like, when there's just, the things are so maddening that, the things that would occur of just like a simple statement that, and like, just like you said, like, I'm reacting before I might have just taken something the wrong way, but I'll just get mad. Then you start a mad discussion, which just gets the other person mad. Next thing you know, it's just two people's anger fighting each other when the issue is just something, who knows what it even is. But yeah, I was able to slow that down even when I feel like my buttons were pushed. Like, say like there's something that's happening to me where I feel like I'm like, oh, this pisses me off. I'm able to like acknowledge the fact that it pisses me off, take a breath, and just calmly communicate. And that's been from being able to meditate and building up whatever that distance is between your thoughts and your immediate reactions. And I will gladly say I haven't broken anything in a long time. And the only thing I've done is I've twisted a Chipotle fork in anger. About a month ago, I twisted a Chipotle fork.
Nice.
But
Well,
yeah, and that's an extreme case, but I'm telling you, it's like, it's just, I think it's doubly important as a man, especially a man in a relationship, but even just a man in general, but especially in a relationship, to never ever explode into anger in a relationship. You have too much to lose. And I didn't like, I never like hit women or anything, but even like, smashing something is like, the predecessor, to all that stuff. They might, who knows, but
oh, right.
it's just a bad look. But as a
Yeah.
man, if you burst into anger in a relationship, you lost. You're already going to lose the argument no matter what, because you're arguing against just like a wormhole of logic. But if you lose your cool, you're done. And it's been tremendously helpful to keep everything cool. And that's been, for me, a huge thing that helped in terms of meditating and mindfulness bell. The mindfulness bell is one of my favorite things right now,
Yeah.
because that's like
tell me about that.
so I'll bring it up on my phone. That is so I was talking on my podcast about a thing called, what I called, the monastery time diet, which just was me setting a ton of alarms on my phone. It was something I thought I made up that I thought sounded cool. It's just mindfulness. So when I talked about it on my podcast, some guy was like, "Oh, that's just mindfulness." And he gave me this thing. It's called, I don't know if you can see it, the mindfulness bell.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
you can set so I have it goes off for me every 45 minutes, and you can set it for like random times in the hour. But like, so to give you an idea, I'll just be going about my day, ding, that thing goes off, and I freeze what I'm doing. And I go like, all right, is my day going the way I like planned it / want it to go? If not, why is that? And do you accept the reason? And either I do or I don't. And it's like, what is the temperature in terms of like mood of your house right now? I'm like real big right now and trying to, keep the, I feel like as a man, it's kind of up to me to like keep the mood of the house at a certain level. That's at least something I've taken upon myself.
So
So I have
when
to take
you
an
say
honest.
house, you mean literally like your physical house, not like your body
Oh
house.
no, my
Like,
physical house, my home,
oh yeah.
for like everyone in my home. It's like, especially because I just had a baby, and it's a really hard time for women after they had a kid, with all the postpartum stuff and everything. So
Right.
and you watch them, they do a lot of hard work. They're getting like cut open and shit, and like it's pretty horrible.
Oh yeah.
So as a man, it's like, well, because a lot of times what happens is the women are just, they're just good at all this stuff. This, you have the baby, they're doing all these little finger motions. My friend Sydney actually pointed out, like they're just trained to like you ever pull like a shirt onto a tiny baby's arm? It's hard to do. Like, they have this weird dexterity where they're able to do it. They're breastfeeding. You just feel like an idiot all day long,
Right.
because they're just like, what are you doing? Why would you do it like that? And it's like, because I've never fucking done this before. I'm in charge right now of a tiny vagina, and I'm like, I don't know how to do anything for this thing. I don't know. And then, you have someone, a vagina master, just standing over your shoulder being like, what the fuck is that? And it's like, I've never used one of these fucking things. I don't know what I'm doing. So it's infuriating. But what happens is a lot of times men check out and get resentful, and they just go, okay, whatever, you know what you're doing. And then they kind of dissociate from the situation and say like, fuck this, and get all quiet and resentful, which is, I think, something a lot of men do.
Right.
And I'm not just making that up. I've taken a family therapy class right now. I'm almost done school, but that was like my last class is family therapy. And they talk about how that constant dynamic of men checking out, like in the first couple of years of, the child thing. Cause they're like, I feel useless. I feel dumb. This is bullshit. And at the same time, the woman's raging with hormones and stuff. So it's a hard if you're not mentally equipped, it's a hard thing to deal with. But the whole point of my rant is I've taken it upon myself to say like, all right, I'm going to bear the burden of doing whatever kind of emotional labor is required with like keeping the house from slipping into like a quiet power struggle of like resentfulness and bullshit. So the bell rings, and that's what I'm like, am I doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing? Am I wasting time? How am I feeling right now? And how have I just acted in the last, few moments? And you'd be surprised. I check in. I'm like, man, I was just a dick 10 minutes ago. Now I have to deal with that, and I'll go address the situation, blah, blah, blah.
So just so I'm clear, so what are the questions that you ask yourself? How are you feeling right now?
How am I? Yeah. So first thing I asked, what am I doing? Like, am I wasting time? Am I bullshitting? Am I doing the things that I said I was going to do? So basically, what am I doing? Am I doing the things I plan to do that day? If not, why? Sometimes there are good reasons that gets interrupted. And then second, I just like, how am I feeling? So really, what am I doing? How am I feeling? To summarize it.
What am I doing? How am I feeling? But then also you have the house question, right?
Yeah. And that's the how am I feeling is typically for me, almost always linked to what's going on in the house.
Oh man.
So
I mean, have you done any work in creating the actual physical environment? Any like intentional, deliberate work on, and I literally mean like, interior decorating, as crazy as that sounds.
no,
But
no,
we all had the feeling of walking into a space. Like when you walk into Starbucks, you get a feeling, right? Like,
yeah, well,
have you done any work in that
yeah,
area?
I painted my whole house. So I painted we changed like the color of the walls. That helps. That's pretty much it. All I did really was paint. So no, to answer your question, no. I mean, yes, painting, but other than that, no, I haven't really. I mean, we've kind of thrown stuff together as we live there in terms of like what it looks like and designing it. But
Yeah.
and even when we first moved in, it was actually we like our financial situations improved. At first, it was kind
Yep.
of like it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't like I was going to IKEA and being like, we're getting one thing, we're getting out of
Right.
here. No, we're not getting
Right.
a $500 IKEA couch, 200. Like, so now that
Right.
that's kind of relaxed, that pressure, oh, you know what I have? I take that back. We set up a roof deck, and that's been
Oh, that's
when it's
cool.
nice out. That is the thing. Yes, to answer your question, I designed and bought all the stuff for a roof deck, and that when it's nice out is one of my two super happy places in my house, and that's an important thing too. Not to rant, but I've been doing another thing in my house where I have identified like happy spots where like I have
Mm.
I have a sectional couch upstairs. And if I sit in this spot, that's like, I feel actually very good. I'm like, I feel this is actually very funny. And I sound ridiculous when I say this, but I have a three, in terms of how do I feel, I have a 3-question check-in that I got from a Kenny Loggins song. Um,
Okay.
it-
That's awesome.
the song's great, by the way, too.
What song is it?
I think it's called "I Would Do Anything,"
Okay.
featuring Jennys. It's from he has an album Live in the Redwood Forest where he just threw a concert in the Redwood Forest for all of his friends. Pretty cool.
That's awesome.
And Kenny Loggins, I could talk about him for 20 minutes. I love Kenny
I
Loggins,
don't even
but
know who it is, so I'd love to
he
talk to
sang
you.
Footloose.
I got crickets. What's Footloose?
Been working so hard.
Oh, okay. Is that? Yeah.
Na-na-na.
Okay. Got it. Got it.
I
Okay.
mean, that's one of he's got a gazillion hits, but he in his one song, what does he say? It's like, I feel loved, I feel safe, I feel free. And there are 3 things that, and it's just in the song lyric. And I would listen to the song every day and I'm like, I love this. And I stopped and actually like listened to the words and I'm like, that's a pretty good, there are 3 really good things to feel. Like, do you feel
Yeah.
loved?
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Do you feel safe? Awesome. If you're loved, you also feel free to do the things that you want to do. And if you feel those 3 things, I don't really see how you can complain. So that's kind
Right.
of that's my check. When I ask myself, how do I feel? I'm specifically curious on those 3 fronts.
So
For the
you
most.
go to like, if you can describe the location that you go, is there anything you did with that location?
No, well, the roof deck, yeah, we like, I bought a bunch of sectional furniture from IKEA and like
Yeah.
combined multiple sectional outdoor couches. So it's like a huge wraparound couch. We have a fire pit, like a propane fire pit because we can't have open flame on the roof.
Mhm.
And then we got this like these little AstroTurf tiles and snapped them together. And then we have like a wood bordering thing that I designed where it looks like a little, like a grass path that goes, it's all fake grass, but it's like a little path that kind of expands out. It looks pretty neat.
Yeah. That's
So,
awesome.
and it's just visually pleasing. You see it, you're like, that looks kind of cool. And then like, so that's like my number one spot in terms of inside on my couch, which is another, I'm a big fan of sectional couches. On the other, I sit right in the middle. So like I can sit on the couch and my legs can be on the like lay down on the other part of the couch. And if
That's
I'm
my
sitting
favorite.
there,
That's my favorite spot of a couch as well. Oh
that's my
yeah.
happy spot, dude. If I sit on there and I'm sitting there with my wife and now my baby and we were watching like the Ozarks, like put on a show. Let me sit when I'm done all the stuff I need to do that day and I can sit down and watch the Ozarks in my happy spot on the couch.
Yep.
There's nothing you can do to bother me, honestly.
I love it, man.
And that's been it. Well, that's a real thing to like wonder if and this is maybe a little bit too deep, but I feel like in my 20s, I had a problem where I constantly felt estranged from my environment, where I'd be in a place and be like, this doesn't feel right here. Like, and that's from constantly renting like shitty, cheap houses in like dangerous neighborhoods. So I'd
Yep.
constantly feel kind of like, and you'd move all the time. So you never really feel attached to where you're living. So I
Right.
kind of had to, once we bought a house, I had to get used to the idea of like, oh, we're not just like, you know, trashing this place and leaving in a year. Like we're
Right.
building a home and all the psychological stuff that comes with having like a steady residence.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. I mean, and one of the things that I admire about you, and I think a lot of people should, is, how do I say this? Like because you just dipped into a bit of your history. So, for those of you who know, Matt and I have a very long history together. Met each other in college, I think like the first week.
Very,
And then,
very soon.
Oh yeah. And then almost spent like every day together for the next like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
But and I'd love to go down that rabbit hole with you. But like number one, your interests are super diverse. And I think that's true for almost every human that I know. But society kind of persuades us away from that. People almost talk negatively about having diverse interests, and it's like, oh, you got to focus on one thing.
Yeah.
But not only do you have diverse interests on it, you have pursued your diverse interests, and then, and I say this in the best way that you can, in the best sense of the word, you capitalized on those diverse interests. So, and I think you're a role model for that, because, and I'll say some things about your story, and, I want you to go deeper into this, but like, you are one of the few guys that I know, or few people that I know who've said, I want to do things differently. Like, I want to be a stand-up comedian. I want to do this. I want to own real estate. I want to pursue my degree. I do not want to be working in an office, 10 hours a day, all of these things. But then you follow through with it. And in my opinion, paid a price. You had a certain sacrifice, like, because I know you won't. Is it okay if I talk about your house that you lived in?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So Matt literally lived in a house after college where I walked into this house. It was in West Philadelphia, in a very bad part of it. And I walked into his living room, and I could see in the backyard, not through a window, but through the door. There was a door, and it had like a 2-inch gap between the door, the bottom of the door, and the floor. Right.
Yeah.
And this is and he's a suburban kid, basically, in an inner city West Philadelphia neighborhood, which is probably one of the most risky places for him to be. Right. And I'm not exaggerating. Right.
No,
like,
it was wild, man. That was I mean, it was cool because there was only like 3 houses. All the houses on the block were knocked down except for mine, which got knocked down, I think, recently. We sold it and they knocked it down and be like, this place sucks. And they knocked it down. But yeah, there was me. And then across the lot, there was a prostitute. And then there was a basketball coach. And then there was just an old lady. And then on the immediate corner on Sal's on 37th on 38th Street, it was just an open air drug market.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, at the time that was my little Shangri-La, though. I will say, on, Philly, for people who don't understand, like, you can be in a neighborhood that, it's like an inner city neighborhood, high crime, murder rate, but it's very block by block. And there's a ton of like weird politics that go, like, I was on like, I think more of like an elderly block where there was like a couple elderly people, a basketball coach. And again, there was just this working prostitute. And it was funny when I first pulled up to the house, she lifted her shirt and showed me her breasts, and she was older too. So they were like, she hit me with some Nat Geo titties. So I pull up and I'm like, hey, I'm moving in here. And she's like, oh, hey, just never even mentioned it. It was like, oh, hey, I live there, and introduced herself. And we were, it was actually really sad. Her daughter jumped out of a 3rd story. I also met her daughter, and she had jumped out of a 3rd story window after smoking PCP.
Oh,
and I come outside, this lady's outside screaming and screaming. I'm like, what's what's going on? She's like, my daughter's in the hospital. I got to go, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, all right, I'll drive you down. It's not far, going to University of Penn.
Yep.
So I drove her down there. And as soon as I let her out, she caught me off guard. She's like, thank you so much. And came in and gave me a big kiss on the lips. And I was like, because the guy who previously lived there you could look out the back, that back door you were talking about. There was a gap because there was no door. It was a chain link. It was a chain that wrapped around some kind of like restaurant. Like, it wasn't a real door. It was like a metal kind of chain link thing. So you poke your head out there and she would just be blowing people in the backyard. It was wicked. Oh, so yeah, she planted one on me. I was just like, oh, Jesus Christ.
Well, and I walked into, Matt was giving me the tour of his house, and he was sleeping under a bug net. You were sleeping under a bug net. right?
Yeah.
And it was not for, it was not for interior decorating purposes. It was for bugs. It was for the
skeeters.
utility of a bug
Skeeters
net.
were a real threat. Yeah. There was a raccoon that lived on the roof that would wake me up every night. If you have a raccoon on your roof, it sounds like a human being. Very loud and very heavy thudding footsteps. So that was like, yeah, it was funny, man. I had little kids break into my house at one point and through that little gap, they squeezed through and took like my change. It was pretty fun.
It's, so I mean, we could talk for hours, but it's just,
Sure,
it's ridiculous. But that's the thing, man. Like, people need to hear that, because in my opinion, you are approaching the epitome of your craft, right? Like, or, you're getting into the upper quartile of your craft, but you were willing to pay the price. And, those stories are funny, but that's scary as hell, right? Like, though, that's what it takes oftentimes to build up something, if you do not just want to go into the quote machine and be an accountant just because, mom and dad told you. So
yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of safety within that structure. Like as I've grown up and like got older and, got kind of further into like, the unknown, I guess you would say, I would look at guys sitting out on like a Comcast bench, like, that worked at the Comcast center eating pizza and be like, God, I would get jealous. I'm like, damn, that must be awesome. You're all wearing the same shit. Just all getting paid the same, just sitting there eating pizza, not having to do shit. I've worked those jobs. That's the other thing too. I've had a screenwriting teacher at Drexel. My last year, I took a bunch of electives and I took screenwriting was one of them. And he said, he was like, it's one of those things to do, like, especially comedy, I would say. And I don't do stand up as much anymore. I do more like the podcast, but it's something that you do only because you can't do anything else. Not in like a bad way, but like, like when I did, remember the one company we interned at, you did there first and I did it.
Yep.
I had as soon as I think the fourth week, I had a panic attack. I couldn't sit in an office. My body freaked out.
Yeah.
So it was like, I'm almost like allergic to it. So people were like, oh man, that's crazy. I was like, I didn't have a choice. I couldn't do anything else.
Well, here's the funny thing, man. Like if you just look into the raw data, like when I was in New York, like literally it is a common narrative on Wall Street where men and women in their 50s, especially men in their 50s, are having heart attacks.
Yeah.
Right. So they are delayed. Like they are basically saying like, my body is sending me signals, but like society is telling me to do this. And at this point now I've got golden handcuffs, so I'm not going to get out. But
yeah,
I think it's so important to hear your story of like, look, pick your poison. You either have the pain of the discipline or the pain of the regret. And sleeping under bug nets and going through all those stories, like, yeah, it's hilarious, but it also sounds terrifying, right? At the same time, like it's now coming out of the end of it, I would imagine that you would say it's worth it relative to the inevitable future of either, heart attack. And by the way, I'm not exaggerating. Like the statistics are massive on
really.
Oh yeah. Well, and just in general, if you look at the the American population,
yeah,
the amount of people on medication, I forget what it is, but it's a crazy statistical percentage. This is a very common thing, but now for you coming out on the other side, because that's what I would say. And I know Matt's too humble and I want to talk about this stuff. Like, like now you got successful podcast, like you were Philadelphia's funniest comedian, like you're doing all this stuff, you're pursuing a master's degree, all of these things that I think should really be looked at as a role model in society, and you're not flaunting it. And I don't think you ever will, because I know you personally, and I know your family, right? Like, you just don't have that in your DNA. But now would you say, number one, that you are coming out, and I would even say have come out on the other side of it? How do you feel? Like, do you feel you would have done it differently? So do you feel like you would have picked being the guy at the Comcast center just in a suit and tie who's an accountant in the accounts receivable department?
No, I'm incapable. I'm incapable of interacting in that environment and not being sussed out as a total freak.
Right.
At the last job, I had a field placement for my school where I was, I was in like a nonprofit where I was just, hanging with people, doing a job, and people would, I was trying to be cool, and I was really holding back a lot of my like innate personality, and people still would stop and be like, it was funny. One guy actually was like, dude, honestly, you should have a podcast. And I wasn't telling anybody I work, because at the time I had just gotten in, like, there's a big scandal and all this shit. So I was like, I didn't want anyone to know. Actually, that might've been before, that was before the scandal, excuse me. But
yeah,
or whatever, scandal in quotes. But Yeah. So people would even stop and be like, man, you should have a podcast. You're this, I could listen to you talk all day. And I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah.
double lifing. But yeah, I do feel like and this has been the struggle, especially if you do anything outside of like it was again with like the podcasting thing, or I just knew I wanted to make money online. That was a big thing of mine. It was very vague. I had a very vague goal, but I was like, I know people make money on the internet. I'm like, I want to do that. And I want, I tried a gazillion things. I was doing content writing for like $25 for like 750 word articles.
Yeah.
Just getting nowhere for a long time. And then, and I've always kind of thought, and I think a lot of people too have the conception that it's like if you're doing anything, I think anything entrepreneurial, anything like kind of I guess even if you're at a job where you're like, you're going to get that one promotion, it's very concrete. Doing like the stand-up stuff and all of that, you're waiting for green lights, you're waiting for this. But with the podcast, we just kind of started it just kind of out of like, the stand-up scene was kind of like sucked, and it sucked in that like, we were stuck, me and my co-host felt kind of stuck in a way, and he's now gone on to do a ton of stuff with stand-up. But I remember just being like, we're in this, that was another little house, and we were in West Philly. It was like 5 of us, 5 dudes. I'd just gotten divorced. So I'd brought in my 30th birthday on an air mattress.
Yeah.
At my brother's house post-divorce. And now I'm living with 5 other comedians in a house where we're paying like $200 a month. And the place was an absolute disgrace.
Oh, I'm sure.
And again, it was just like, well, shit, man, this is kind of tough psychologically to handle. I mean, it was a lot of fun, obviously, but there was a couple nights there where like, especially getting to your 30s, when you're older and you do those, like, what am I doing with my lives when you're older, and you don't have anything to show for anything either. It's like, you just have like the things you wanted to do. There's nothing to back them up. Well, at least I have this.
Right.
That'll sideline people real quick, man. I felt the pressure myself. But sorry, I kind of ramble. But
no. It's
in terms of so it didn't really. We started a Patreon for a podcast, and all of a sudden there was like the fact that anyone was paying anything. I was like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And then it got to the point where like it covered our bills, and now I'm like, wow, now like I'm being paid in the world to exist in the world, to think and speak, which is I've always really, I think, has been something I think a lot of people really want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a trip, man. It's like, every day I'm scared like it's going to go away. And so that just makes me make sure I'm actually producing value, rather than just being like, well, I'm just an anointed person, and, people should just like throw themselves at my feet to hear me. I assume like I'm full of shit and what I'm going to say is dumb. So I make sure that's not the case, if that makes sense.
More people need to hear that message you just said. I need to make sure I produce more value. Like that if I could, I might even consider like printing that out and putting it on my wall, literally. That is a piece of golden platinum information. Like that's what society needs to think its job is. Every human being should be thinking, how can I be more valuable for myself and for others? And I think both of those are important. You don't want to be a martyr. You don't want to try to do everything for everybody. That we know how that story ends. But thinking about, you are a value creating machine. How do you do that? So
I'll tell you how that story ends. You rise 3 days later, dude, and go to heaven. But go on.
Nice.
Excuse me. Yeah. No, I agree. The value piece you kind of put in my head, because I always just like, I had an abstract. I knew I wanted to do things that were just meaningful to people. But when it was really simple when you started saying like, you started saying about yourself, like, I'm just creating value. And it's like, oh yeah, that is a good way to put it. And then that's kind of a, what would I say? That's kind of like a put up or shut up moment, when like, if you can say like, well, I'm doing this and that, that's a quick question to assess whether you're full of shit or not. It's like, are you creating value? Do people thank you for what you do? It's an easy litmus test.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, you have done something like, tell me about the stand-up comedy route. Because you put in the work for years. So what was that journey like for you?
So it's pretty terrifying. I remember I started out in college. I remember I did Helium, the open mic. You do 3 minutes, you go up, you have no idea and I wasn't never really a big public speaker. I would give presentations at Drexel and feel like I was going to pass out. So I did Helium, and it was a little bit different because you just get to talk about things that you think are actually funny. But it's especially stand-up comedy, is you are not even you are immediately and unmistakably lesser than when you start out, because it's like fighting. Like you go out, you perform, for the most part for the first few years. Like I'd have a couple of times where I do pretty good and people laugh here and there. For the
Mhm.
most part, you're bombing, you're embarrassing yourself, and you're disclosing personal things that don't pay off all the time. So you might say something about yourself that like you'd rather people not know.
Right.
And if they laugh, everyone's happy with it. And then if they don't laugh, you're just told everybody like painfully embarrassing things about yourself. And then
Right.
we're doubly humiliated by the fact that people are just like displeased by you being there. So it's
Oh yeah.
like, it is an absolute, it's definitely tests people's limits, man, to go out there and just bomb and bomb, and you kind of get like a camaraderie with other comedians, although it's a double-edged, it's kind of a two-way thing, because there's a ton of like, very serious jealousy in comedy, where like if you've been doing like, say you've been doing it for like a year, you see somebody new doing well, and I don't care how cool you are or how nice you are, you see them and you just want them to go away. You're
Right.
just like, you're like, I fucking hope they do bad. Because
Right.
it's like there's very limited spots. So like like, so when I started doing stand up, I think I did it for like a couple years off and on, and then I competed in Philly's Funniest, and I made it pretty far. Surprisingly, I've made it very far in the competition when I was 23.
Yeah.
And then like an idiot, the last night I did it, I remember being like, I'm gonna do new material. I've had people come into these things. I don't want like the people who are coming see me do the same thing. So I tried a
Mm.
bunch of new stuff and just kind of like tanked. So I went out in the finals, but I was at the time happy with my decision. But yeah, so it was just like, you do a thing, and I got in the finals, you get some kind of validation, and then you're just back to the regular grindstone of like, now I'm going to open mics, I'm bombing at these things. Was I really that fun? So it's a ton of like, if you're looking for external validation, it's like one of the worst things you can do, because if you don't, like, now when I do stand up, I know I'm an inherently funny person. Even if I just bomb 20 times in a row, it's like I
Mm.
can get people to laugh. But before, when you first start, you're like, I need people to tell me that I'm funny and worthy of being up here.
Mm.
And that reflects when you're talking to a room full of people and you don't believe in yourself. That's actually displeasing for the crowd to watch. Nobody wants to watch you up there sweating and struggling and kind of
Yeah.
nervous. It
Yeah.
elicits like a reaction to people. So, and again, I can never give like a succinct response, but really it's just a long ruling process of being constantly disappointed severely and being like manically elated to where you're like, oh, I just got this new thing. Now it's all coming together. And then next thing you know, you're doing some stupid room in like a bingo house for a bunch of like 60-year-old people who are like literally, I did a show one time, because you fall into like, you want to get into like the clubs and the cities, because you're hanging around like kind of like hip cosmopolitan crowds, but where a lot of the money is doing these like rooms out in the middle of nowhere where you're just
Oh yeah.
performing for like 60-year-olds who, again, are me and 60-year-olds, a sense of humor don't really like, they don't really match up very well for the most part, not all the times. But like if I go out in like rural Pennsylvania and start like talking about how weird it is that God's monitoring like homosexual activity from like, they're just watching that and they're pissed. They don't like that at all.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember doing shows where like people would turn around, you're watching this and you're doing the thing you think you're good at, and then like a person turns around to someone they're with and like, this guy sucks, like audibly, and you're taking that in stride as you keep going. It's not for the faint of heart, I would say.
Oh man. Well, and one thing that you hit on perfectly is like you said the word years. Like it
Yeah.
took you years, and that's going through that emotional agony, right? I mean, it is a tough thing, and I know exactly what you're referring to, because it's a pattern that not a lot of people talk about, which is it's not like when you start to reach a certain level of success, it's just like you hit this point and then it goes straight up. It's
Yeah.
usually you get a little taste of it, right? Like, and I can say in finance, like, I've been in a scenario where, literally one day I was like, oh man, like I'm in a Wall Street boardroom and the top floor, like overlooking the Statue of Liberty, like that kind of stuff. And then the next day I go to a speech, in front of hundreds of people. I think one point there was like 1,000 people on finance. And then, but that was just cause like, you got a few wins, but
Yep.
then a few weeks later, right, I'm in the house of like somebody, who barely has two pennies to rub together, and like, and they're looking at me like I don't know what I'm talking about. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not
Yeah.
saying that disrespectfully
Yeah.
towards them. I'm saying it gives this pattern of like, success is not just this, you hit this point and then all of a sudden you're done. It's like you usually get a taste of it and it doesn't feel good. It's like 2 days ago, I was in front of 1,000 people. Right. And now I can't even close this deal with somebody who's just talking about investing $1,000, you know?
Yep. Yeah.
So it's a very interesting pattern that I think not a lot of people hear about, but it's like, you know, it's kind of like it's a pattern that if you stick with it and you love what you do, it still has an upward trajectory, but there's still a lot of volatility in the short term.
Yeah, I think we've got brainwashed by movies. Like the whole thing I was trying, you
Mhm.
could summarize everything I was trying to say by like, and then this happens, and then then you're like, like a Twitter check mark. I'm success. Like you're branded into success, and like, no, you're just doing better than you were, and you can lose that at any moment. There's
Yep.
no like, unless you're in the mafia and you're like a made man or whatever, you can still get in trouble and busted. But
Nice example.
yeah, but it really is. It's one of those things where it's like when you do have success in any area. First of all, too, that's like should be defined strictly by you should really do thought on what you define success as. I have an easy explanation, an easy definition of like, am I in charge of my day? If I'm in charge of my day,
Mm.
I'm successful. I'm winning. That is my goal to do that. And then I have other, I want to be in charge of my day so that I can do X, Y, and Z. So there's goals that I can't even hope to do unless I'm in charge of my day. So that was like always like my number one total goal to be like, I don't want people telling me where to be. For
I
the
think that's
most part,
phenomenal.
unless like, it's part of what I'm doing, what I want to do. I just can't, I don't like that. So,
Oh man, no. I mean, the major reason, one of the major things that happened to me in my life was when I was in New York. It was a Wednesday morning. I tell people this all the time. It was a Wednesday morning. It was literally at 2 a.m. in the morning, and I was working with my boss. And
mm,
this was a pattern, like almost every week. If you were to say like to find me, you would go to the office at 2 a.m. on Wednesday morning, and you'd
mm,
find him and I sitting there doing reports, tweaking little things to try to make things perfect. And he turns to me, and he and I had a great relationship. He's an absolutely phenomenal man. And I said, "Hey man, like, what's going on? Like, you seem a little off." And he's like, "Honestly, man," he's like, "because this, when I left on Sunday," so he would fly from, I think it was Colorado, every Sunday night away from his family, and then fly back on Friday morning, right? Or no, Thursday night. Would
mm,
basically wouldn't get back until like Friday morning,
yeah,
or late Thursday night. And that's his pattern. Like for years, that's what he would do, right? And he's like, honestly, man, I'm messed up because, and this guy's in his 50s, right? And he's like, because my 4-year-old son told me that, Daddy, I love you, but I hate your job. Because every single week, he only had a couple days with his son.
yeah,
And this is a guy making a boatload of money, right? Like, that was the benefit, but he had golden handcuffs at that point. And dude, that was when I decided. It was like, and then I got a phone call from my cousin a couple of days later that pushed me over the edge, which I'll spare the details now. But that was like, holy shit, like, you know, the price that he is paying for his paycheck
yeah,
is unbelievable. And that's what you're saying. Like, you are basically at that point, you are a slave to your employer. And I don't say that as some sort of like, hey man, like, get rich quick. Like that's not it at all. But you got to realize the transaction that you're making when you are signing up to give somebody, basically you're on call at all time. And if
yeah.
what you're saying is like, if I don't know my day, that's a big problem, dude. That's a phenomenal goal to have.
Yeah, that's been my only concrete because I feel like a lot of my life I kind of wishy-washily floated through it, but that was looking back on it. It was like, well, no, that was pretty much my central focus, which I've been happy to do. And it like again, it could be, and there's some people who actually love being in like a hierarchical environment, like people who love being in the military or like a big corporation who really do enjoy that kind of like pecking order and like
Yeah.
getting the feeling of where they fit. And that's what some people like, and that's cool too. But yeah, everyone's different and it's just really figuring out what actually works. Like if you're in an environment where you constantly, I think I said this to you the other day of like taking assessment of how your activity, job, whatever, however you want to call it, affects your appetite for life. And if it's
Mm,
not enriching it or making you kind of like charging you up, and again, not everybody, some people are going to have to do jobs they hate, blah, blah. I totally get that.
yeah.
But if that is the case, your only way out of that is by saving enough money to kind of call your employer's bluff and say like, I'm out. I'll save enough money so I can support myself while I find something I'd rather do, that's better than this. And if in a position where you're like, man, I hate my job. This sucks. Then you're just blowing all of your money on bullshit. You're going to the
Right.
casino, you're getting drunk. you're stuck. They got you. You're stuck.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just something I've always identified. It's like the only way out of it is saving your money and being able to support yourself in the world. I had it like just branded into my brain where like, if I'm not working and I'm just existing in the world, I'm flying into a wall. Like I'm going to run out of something horrible is going to happen. That's like a hard thing to get over, if that makes sense.
Mm. Well, one of the things to your point, because, obviously, my occupation is investment management, and it's particularly around, the resource of money, obviously. And I say it in that weird way because I think a lot of people just completely miss the boat on the concept of money, like, and the value that it actually produces. Like, it's nothing more than just it's a unit to transfer value and to store up value. And one of the things that I think you've done an exceptional job at is that you have been willing to do whatever it takes to buy your freedom to explore, to go out and explore like the real passions that you want to explore and produce value for people. So, I like, talk about your physical labor jobs that you've done basically for decades.
Yeah. I mean, that was easy though. Cause that's all my family does pretty much for the most part. Most of my extended family does, like my dad has a demolition business with his brothers. I've worked as a house painter, as an electrician. So I've always kind of bounced back. And that was kind of actually a blessing to be born into that, to where like I could go get jobs where I could just tell my boss like, hey, I'm not going to be here for 2 days. And they're just like, well, since you're not like addicted to drugs and you have a driver's license,
Yeah.
you're kind of indispensable to this operation. So fine. So, but it is, that's something though you do see, like, when you're using your body like that day by day, it's like a clock, man. All the older guys who do it are like, you better figure something else out. Otherwise your body's going to fail eventually. So it is almost, in that case, it's like a race against time.
Well, and you're kind of being too humble about it. Like, number one, you say like, oh, that was easy. First of all, I don't know, physical labor. First of all, I think everybody should do it.
Yeah, you did it for a while too.
Oh yeah, no, I did it my whole life before college and all that stuff. I mean, it should be a prerequisite for every human being on this earth to go through, years of physical labor.
Yeah.
Because then when you get into the more abstract intellectual worlds, or whatever you want to call it, right? Like the boardrooms, et cetera, where it's just mind, it's mind games rather than physical games. At the end of the day, it's like, it's the whole Bill Belichick quote. He's like, it beats being a plumber. And that is no disrespect towards plumbers. Like, I've done everything from janitorial work to everything, but it's like, it beats digging a ditch. Because when you've dug ditches, and you and I literally have done that for physical labor, like when you've done that for like literally the entire day is digging a hole, right? Like in 105 degrees in Philadelphia, where it's hot and humid and there are no trees in that particular digging area, right? Like, yeah, it sucks at that point in time, but you eventually learn that it's like, this is what I have to do for money. And then you start to see the benefits of it. But then when you get into areas like you're talking about, I mean, I don't know about for you, but for me, I still have problems in my professional world, in my personal world today, just like we all do. But it's like, are they real problems? Like, I'm not out in the sun. I used to have nightmares about the sun. I literally used to have nightmares about the sun.
It's like that one Mario level where it chases you and throws turtles at you.
Yeah, exactly. Like literally,
that's been a thing that's been hard, because my master's was in social work, because I wanted to get in some sort of like, honestly, the social work was kind of like a cheat code to do therapy, because like otherwise I'd have to go go for psychology. You can just do social work and still do therapy. Which, I think I'm going to do something different with it. But dude, I mean, you go from being in like you were saying, like you're in a manual labor environment, and then you go sit with people who have never done this. You can tell have never like at my orientation, the air conditioning was off in the gymnasium. So it got up to like 80 degrees in the gymnasium.
Yeah.
And you would have thought people were like in like a Bangladesh shoe factory, dude. They're going to die. People were like, I can't be here. I have to leave. And I remember just watching them, everybody in there, and just being like, have you guys ever like been outside in the summer before all day? Like, it's not bad. There's a fan above us that blow. Like it's definitely not like ideal.
Yeah.
But there was people in there who were like, as if they were like up 10,000 feet in the air, who were there like, I can't breathe. And it was just like, Jesus Christ, man.
Oh yeah.
So I agree with you. I think people should should have to. And dude, if anything, it's like if you were out all day in this, like I've spent entire winters where I'm outside and it's cold, entire summers where I'm outside and it's hot. So it's like when I'm in a car and the AC, and I get from a hot like outside and I hit that AC on, I'm enjoying that a little more, I think, than like the average cat. And there's people who enjoy that more than me, but it's like it just lets you like you go inside if you have confronted that kind of thing, and then you flick the AC on your house, like there's not really much that can bother you. It's like, yeah, my house is cool. I'm not out, I'm only getting hot from like between my house and my car. That's awesome, man. Rather than having to be outside in long pants all day and a hard hat and just, like you were saying, like one of the last things I've done for manual labor was a building around the airport, like in Tinicum somewhere.
Yeah.
Where I was in a building where you couldn't break the windows out because the windows had asbestos caulk. So the windows had to remain intact. And then they had lifted machinery in through like the bottom and kind of drove it up. So the building was pretty much sealed except for the bottom. And so there was machines driving around me. So there's nowhere for the smoke to escape. So there's just diesel fumes in this building to the point where it's like blue. The world in there was tinted blue from the smoke.
Right.
And I was cutting drop ceilings. So I'd have to like cut drop ceilings down. The building had been vacant for so long that there was like the concrete floor would be bare, drop the ceiling, and then dried pigeon shit would fall down to the point where it would cover the ground for about 2 inches, the entire ground. And then it was dry, so it would float up in the air. So you'd have like floating pigeon shit around you, falling down the back of your neck, diesel. Like, this is some people's every day. I'm lucky to be able to like not have to rely on that. That was just something I did for work that I relied on at the time. People do that for 60 years, man.
My uncle died from it.
From what?
So from the dried pigeon
bird flu.
To. Yeah, I mean, I forget what he had, but basically he had some sort of, toxicity from literally pigeon shit because he worked in a warehouse.
It's nasty, and apparently, this is like a technical thing, but it's dry, it's okay, but as soon as it gets into your body, when it gets moisture, it kind of like all those germs, almost like a fossil, just whatever that bacteria is, just comes alive, which is pretty nuts.
No, man, I mean. I remember when you and I used to rehab houses together and, with your cousin and like knocking down ceilings and walls in West Philadelphia. And we would literally have, soot in our ears and in our nose for days. Like you would blow out black, like just pure black for days from your nose. Yeah. And I'm not saying that to sound a certain way, but it's like when you've gone through that, then the stuff that we're taught is easy. It's easy.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you encounter it's that whole quote, better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war.
Yeah.
Like, you can't fake, right? You can't fake being a warrior like you have to go through the experiences because the brain works by contrast, in a lot of different ways. It's like, if you don't have something, it's one thing reading about it. It's another thing going through it. So yeah, man, like you are, and I mean, for you, because I know this is definitely the case for me. I think I do well in my profession, especially like in the investment world, because at the end of the day, like, when people play out the Armageddon scenarios, like we're going through now, like the coronavirus, et cetera, and it's like, people literally, I talk on the phone with clients and they're going through, like literally they're implying like Armageddon, like the world is collapsing, like money's going to go away, like all these things. I mean, and they always ask me like, why are you so calm about it? And I feel very fortunate that I'm in a position in an industry where like my thought process is a real asset. Like my emotional equilibrium is a real asset. And I don't know, in the back of my head, it's like, even if all of that stuff ends up happening, which in my opinion it won't, but let's just say it does happen. I don't know. For me, in the back of my head, and I'm curious if it does for you, it's like I know that I can dig holes. And I know that I can survive off of chicken and oatmeal because I literally had a chicken and oatmeal diet for 6 months of my life straight. That's all I ate. Yep. Like, I assume, do you have similar thoughts in your head?
Yeah, 100%. It's when I was honestly, to be, this is my just weird, perverse nature. When I heard like grocery stores are going to shut down, I was like, oh, I'm like, I'm going to have to just like eat peas and meat all the time. I'm going to get ripped. And I remember just like, that's just how my brain works. I'm like survival mode. Like I love the idea. I mean, again, it's people are like, you're an idiot, you're an ass. People would always be like, I have kids. Like I have kids too now, so you can't throw that one at me. I just love the idea of survival mode. Sorry. I love that.
Yeah.
of
No,
being like,
I get it, man.
I love it. Like now you're telling me I'm gonna have to sneak into a grocery store and like steal bread. It's awesome. I mean, it would be exciting for me, but it's also the thing too, where you're saying it's like, dude, I'm like, well, it's funny too, because this is why I always love when I was last doing stand up, I was also working for Andrew. We call him Spud.
Yeah.
And we were painting houses. So like, I would tell him all this, like stand up, like, and then this, and then, we went to in this club, they wouldn't have us. And he would just like, look at me and be like, I don't care. Look at what we're doing right now. We're like
Yeah.
melting old paint off of a thing with like acid that'll burn your fingers off. He's like, I just don't. And it was just like just nice to have that. Like, yeah, I am being a complete bitch about this. And it's like, it's nice to be grounded in like a daily physical activity. There's no room for bullshit when it's you and a wall and you either have to take it down or change the color of it. You can't talk or bullshit unless you're Huckleberry Finn or whoever, Tom Sawyer. You can't like bullshit that. There's no room for like, well, this or like, well, it wasn't. A lot of the problem with a lot of the corporate jobs that I was in very briefly were like, there's so much room for like lying and like, oh, that was not my fault. It's like, dude, I just saw you. You broke this, and there's the physical proof of that. It's not like, well, I didn't do it. That is like 80% of I feel like what goes on in offices of like, just how do I not blame this on me? Who can I pin this on? And it's just nonsense. It's crazy. Does that make sense?
Oh, dude. Oh, I mean, as you're saying, I could tell you 50 different examples of that exact thing right now. Like, I think living your life and accumulating resources, whether that be money or experiences or, or emotional muscle to protect you against not backing you up into a wall to the point where you have to fake a lot of things or like lie about certain things. It happens in corporate America all the time.
Yeah,
like the amount, like, because you're talking about, it's like, it's not concrete, it's more abstract, and people can fiddle with the abstraction. It's like, no, just say it. Like, you didn't do the work.
Yeah.
Right? Or like, or you're just scared of losing your job. That's why you're not willing to say what you should right now. You're not telling me what you actually think because you're scared, because you have not done your job for the last 10 years of accumulating the right resources or whatever, right? Accumulating the right skills, or you played it too safe. So you let the world get bigger and you got smaller simultaneously, and now you just live in this fake world. You're a peach. I call those people a peach. Like, you're just a peach. You bruise like a peach, right? And you now have to protect that, right? And I hope some people get upset about that, because like, if you're that person, you got to snap out of it.
Yeah.
If you are playing the game of where like you just have to constantly go on defensive mode and you've got no offense in you, I think it's a terrible way to live. And you just rely on other people.
Yeah, man, that's 100% true, and that's something that's a bitter, jagged pill for some to swallow. Because it's true, man, and it's like, and I'm saying that because like I would identify aspects of myself like that I'd have to be like, wow, God, like I can't do this, I can't be like this. So it's like, this is not from upon the high horse. This is from like thinking and reflecting yourself, and then over time you carry those out to where like that becomes true for you. That's what one of my, and this is kind of out of left field, but related. One of my big things about meditation is being able to, in real time, change your physical state in terms of a feeling. Like, say you're kind of anxious, say you're worried about something. In order to not be anxious anymore, you have to, while feeling all of the neurochemicals and all the stuff that comes from being anxious, feeling that, you have to say, I'm okay, and also believe that you're okay in order to have the, neurochemicals associated with feeling okay come replacing, the anxious ones. And in order for you to believe in that, you have to have done the things that allow you to believe the fact that you're okay, because you can't really lie to yourself on that level. So that's why it's like, I think that's really important. And that cuts out all the wishy, like, oh, I'm okay. It's like, well, no, because if you can actually not fool yourself, you're like, no, I've been bullshitting. There was aspects of my life several years ago I had to confront that, like, I was bullshitting for a decade, and I was feeling the pain of it, and I was going, oh, and I could have lied about it, but I did. I was like, I have to correct this. And it, when you start trying to like tug the old ship's wheel of 10 years, it gets heavier and heavier, and you're like, it's like, it's a painful thing to do, but it takes less work than you'd imagine. It just seems gargantuan. And, this might be kind of abstract and wide, but like, you can spend years bullshitting around and, like you were saying, like being in kind of like I love the term of being a peach, of just being a peach and being like, no, you are, fuck you.
Right. Right.
Yeah, hey, man, it happens. We all do it in some regard or the other, but it's like, you know, I do think it's like just the taking a conscious appraisal of oneself.
Mm.
What I was talking about too, your automatic self that kind of just emerges. What is that? Figure out what that is and try to manifest that in the world as much as you can. And it's scary to do that, but
Yeah.
it gets less and less scary once you do it and get, eventually you get good feedback once you get good at whatever you're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you're saying about don't analyze it or don't take such offense as like the whole being. Cause you're right. Like I have certain aspects of myself where I'm being a peach, right? Like, definitely. So it's like, look at the behavior. Yeah. Look at the behavior of what you're doing because, and then, you can get into a super deep philosophical discussion of like, what is identity, et cetera. But to keep it pretty simple for people so we don't get lost in all of that, in like sort of like mysticism or huge rabbit hole. It's like, analyze your behavior. Like there are certain patterns of behavior that yield very predictable results. And only you will know if you're being a peach, right? Like if you're in that particular domain, if you are doing peach-like things, and there's obviously a benefit to it. There's clearly a benefit to it. The payoff is like, if I don't tell my boss what I really think, then I still have a job. But if I tell him what I think, I might not have that job. And in my opinion, it's like, tell them what you think. Like, obviously they're like, I just so much believe in marketplaces and in true marketplaces. I do not like subsidized marketplaces. That's how I think about it. Like a subsidized marketplace is like, I'm not going to bite the hand that feeds me. Well, it's like, okay, but then you're just perpetuating, right? That you're just perpetuating that situation. Like if you're not willing to say it now, what do you think you're gonna be willing to say it like 5 years from now? But then eventually you find yourself in a position where you have to lead people like you right now, right? Like you now have another human being it is solely relying on you and your wife. Like that's crazy to think about. Right?
Yeah, man.
And all of those things will manifest themselves, if you have not been taking responsibility. And it's like, well, at some point somebody's going to look to you to lead. But if you've just been like, just being fed by somebody else, how much of a leader can you really be?
Yeah, dude, that's a painful thing to think about. And it reminds me of like when you hear those stories, like he worked there for 45 years and they fired him. It's like, yeah, that sucks. That sucks. And my heart goes out to that situation, but it's like, and that's from a different area where everyone was like, or a different era where people used to be company men. They're like, yeah, I work here till I die. Mm-hmm. Companies don't care. They'll fire you. Now it's like, at least we're not under the illusion that they like really care about us anymore, where it's like, if you get fired when you're 50, we're just like, yeah, that's what they do. Yeah. Like, but yeah, and again, that's one of those things where you just been subsidized by this company where, honestly, you work in an office, I say maybe I'm just the worst office worker in the world. You do like 2 hours of work a day, to be real, maybe 3 for the most part. I would say the average office worker.
It's probably less than that. If you're talking about the average, for sure.
Yeah, you're not putting in an honest day of work, and then eventually you're 50 years old, and they're like, "Oh, you know what, dude?" They just look at your numbers, and they're like, "Yeah, you're out of here." And then people double down. They're like, "I've been violated. This is so unjust." And it's like, well, you just got paid $60,000 a year for 50 years for not doing much. So they pulled your ticket, man. It's like that's what happens.
Self-reliance, man. I forget who wrote the essay. I think it was like Ralph Waldo Emerson or something like that. I read it years ago, but I read it when I was in high school. It literally, it's one of those like little like mind shifters. It's like people, you have to realize the level of self-reliance that you need to have and you need to practice constantly. And honestly, man, this is one of the really reasons I've had a lot of problems in relationships for like little nuances like this. I refuse to ask somebody to get me a cup of water. I do not understand that question. Like it drives me nuts when people ask me to get them a cup of water. It's like, we're both sitting on the couch, right? We're both sitting on the couch. And if I were to measure, we're both equidistant to the refrigerator, right? Like, what on earth? And no, admittedly, I'm too extreme on it. For sure.
You're fighting a good fight, man. I appreciate you.
But it's like, it's that whole quote of like, how you do anything is how you do everything. Now I probably take that too much overboard as well. However, it's like, we need to, because we've got basically multiple brains inside of our skull, like the way our brains have evolved. Like, I need to be constantly sending my own brain the message of like, don't rely on other people. You can live with other people and be interdependent, but never be fully dependent on somebody. And I take that as literally as extreme as like, I will never ask you to get me a cup of water, ever, 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 ever.
Yeah. But when someone asks you to get a cup of water, what's
I
your
get
response
pissed.
to it?
I get pissed. I literally, I wish I wasn't even saying that. Like, I get a physical, I get a physical feeling of like, why the hell would I get you a cup of water? Like, you know, and my brain could, now I still do it, you know,
Sure.
and if you were to, now, if it's a guest, that's a different story. Like, you know,
Sure.
but it's like, if we're all on the same team, like you live together, whatever, it's like, you know, why? Like, why? Like, do it yourself. And honestly, I know this sounds terrible, and I do need to fix this over time. So
Sure.
I'm openly acknowledging this as a problem. However, the way that I see it is that typically the more I see like humans that I've seen who tend to ask those sorts of questions, it represents itself in a much larger pattern as well.
Hmm.
You know, like I've had many conversations. I have, you know, honestly, just many friends. And again, I'm not saying I'm perfect. I guarantee you, I've got areas in my life where I'm doing something equivalent. Um, but I've noticed it's like, yeah, you ask people to get you water a lot, and then you also complain about like, you know, how your credit card company just charged you, or your bank just charged you an overdraft fee, or like Verizon Wireless is out to get you. You know, like they charge. You know, it's like these little things that pop up. You know, and it's like, or you're just not very responsible,
Yeah.
or like you're not willing to take responsibility for your own life. And I say that in a loving sense. It's like, you need to hear that. Like,
Yeah.
people need to hear that, like, take responsibility, because the people who are out to get you, that might be true like 1% of the time. But the 99% of the other occasions, it's you. And the quicker you realize that, man, the better off you'll be.
Yeah. I mean, there's like, I feel like everyone wants to try to split the world into like two things, but one of the two things, you have the bazillion two things you could split it into is, I think I read a book, The Road Less Traveled, and they talk about there's people who have, people who have neurotic personality traits typically tend to like pull more blame on themselves, and, you know, usually are better prepared because they're like, well, I'm inherently like, nobody owes me anything. I'm going to mess this up. So let me make sure I do all this work. And there's other
Yeah.
people they call like a character disorder, where you're just like, not the opposite, where you're like, this is bullshit. Why is this happening to me? Nothing's my fault. Blah, blah, blah,
Yep.
blah. So, you know, it is a good thing, like merging those two. But yeah, I mean, I'd fall more on the neurotic side, where I'm like, I better do this. I better do this. I better do this, which, you know, comes with anxiety, but it's better, the little daily dose of anxiety, versus like every 4 years of your world just falling out from under your feet and being like, this is so unfair. Why did this happen to me? So, yeah.
Yeah. I just don't get it. Like, I don't
Yeah.
get, and by the way, you know, the majority of my family, so the very people who raised me, and I owe everything to, my mom, my grandpa, my grandma, like all of my family, I got lucky. So let me acknowledge that. Like, I hit the jackpot, what Warren Buffett calls the ovarian lottery. You know, I'm the most blessed dude in the world because my mom raised me. I think she's the best mom on earth.
She's the
Um,
best.
she's awesome, right? Like, and she forced me to go through work and, you know, all of these things, work from a young age, get educated, and so on. So when I say these comments, and having worked in, like, you know, all of the things I'm about to hate on, right? Like, at some point, like, I'll have a family member come up to me, or a friend, and say, like, you know, almost what you said, like, oh yeah, the company fired me. It's like, yeah, because that's a thing that they can do, right? Like, you know, like, as a business, right? Like, in America, the goal, like, at some point, like right now, what's going on with coronavirus, like, some companies have to lay off people, because otherwise the alternative is that the whole company goes away. Right. And now you might not like that. Like, somebody might not like that, but as a business, let's say a business owner, or like if a business owner were to do that, well, they started that business with their own funds and all this, like, they didn't have to do that. So they went out and took the risk to do it. And then they went and hired people. Well, obviously, and whether or not people like it or not, they're going to protect themselves before they're going to protect you. And just the way the dominoes fall is like, if they don't lay people off, well, then they go, like, the whole thing goes away. Right. Like, I literally have clients right now who own restaurants who are telling me that if I do not lay people off, like, literally by next week, we go bankrupt. Like
Yeah.
nothing, like no, like I can't purchase food. I can't purchase anything. Like done. We are done. So that is the
Yeah.
inevitable consequence. So now I might be able to say, well, that's not fair. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like my emotions don't matter. It's like, it's the same thing, when I've helped some friends lose weight. It's like, dude, I don't care about the excuse. It's not that I don't have empathy that your car broke down, that you couldn't get to the gym, or that, you were emotional eating. I have empathy towards that, but your body doesn't give a shit. Right.
Yeah.
The natural consequence of that, we have to acknowledge the result. So when you're working at a company, it's like, yeah, one of the natural consequences could be that they fire you. And if you live your life in a way that says, well, that just shouldn't be, it's like, well, okay, well, you're going to spend a lot of sleepless nights, like wondering why that shouldn't be, but it's a thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it's a thing. I don't know what else to tell you. So you
Yeah.
either can acknowledge, and there's a certain probability that happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's like,
So
swimming in like shark infested waters and getting bit and being like, this is bullshit. And it's
right.
like, well, there's sharks. That's the thing that exists, and
Yeah.
they'll bite you.
Yeah.
So
That's
it's
what they
like, yeah,
do.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's tough, man. It is tough to come to grips. And I struggle with this personally at times with certain
Yeah.
aspects, but it's tough to just come to grips with objective reality, and how it's impossible to have a full scale view of that. So all you can do really is prepare, do the little things that work out typically in a daily fashion. But
Yeah.
but yeah, there's always, I mean, I've had it drilled into my head that like if I'm being lazy, the world's gonna end. Because it was like, that's just from growing up, and like if I
Yep.
was like laying in bed at 9 o'clock, my mom would like pull my blankets off and like, get outside. What are you doing? This isn't a hotel. Go outside. I don't want to see you for it. I'm like, all right.
Your
So yeah,
parents
man. I mean,
are
like,
the best, by the way. Should
it is. Yeah.
you should interview them for no,
I
literally.
know.
I mean,
I know.
I got to take a time to give credit to your parents right now. And I will I obviously don't want to give any sensitive information, but for the family to instill the values in you, when most families who have successful businesses, and I won't go into any more detail than that,
Mhm.
to instill old school, almost like basically middle America type of values, like farmland type of values. That is a rare occasion, man.
Yeah.
You should give your parents a big hug and kiss for me, just as a thanks. I mean, that's a
I will. But yeah, it
yeah.
was that or like my whole family history. It's funny, I had to do a genogram for my family therapy class, where you like go back into like, your grandparents, their parents, all the people who lived, how they died, what happened. And, it was like, I have a weird, in terms of like my family history, it was like you were saying, they had a trash business, they sold it, they got a lot of money for it. So like I was part of a family that was like very quickly socially mobile. Like they
Mm,
were like shot up in social, from like lower middle class. So like poor, lower middle class, lower middle class, lower middle class, upper middle class within
mhm.
like the span of, let's say a decade.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, luckily, that kind of shock training of coming from, I guess, more uh, humble roots in terms of like, my lineage.
Mm.
Still, it's like a residue that still it's funny too, like how there can be things that happen to your great great grandfather that affect the way you're raised,
Oh,
in terms
sure.
of like just the messages that get, like the message that gets, like what message are you sending to your kids, basically,
Yeah.
and like why are you sending that message, and that's something people should really really think about. And
One
if
of
you're
the
sending the
biggest
message the world's not fair, boo hoo, to your kids, that's bad, dude. That's like, it's a bad thing to send to them,
it
rather
is a
than like
terrible message.
self-reliance, get it done, nobody cares, nobody wants to hear it, which can be kind of sad. But well, nobody wants, I mean, this is another part. This is kind of like the stinger on the bee that comes along with it. But like when I was little, if you cry, it would be like, nobody wants to hear you cry. Shut up. I don't
Yeah.
want to see that. Which, again, you should be able to cry and you should express your, that's something I'll try to correct on my end,
Mhm.
going forward.
Yeah.
But again, it's like nobody does want to hear that fucking shit. So,
Right. Right.
so it's like, I don't know. So it's one of those things that, and that's something you have to, and if you want to be like really conscious of everything, is to think about your family history. What are the messages you got? What are the ones that were wrong? Because of course there's some that were wrong. And
Yep.
then how are you going to keep that, you know, that all going, and what are you going to change and propel into the future? And if you're not thinking about that, then you're just acting out some sort of weird unconscious thing that you've just observed and just taken on as your personality without even assessing it. And that's, you
Yeah.
know, I don't know. That's stuff I think about a lot.
No, well, I mean, I think you hit on a couple good topics there, but yeah, I agree. I mean, you and I probably grew up in an area, I mean, just in Philadelphia, right, in general, like for men especially, the resounding theme is, just shut up, get the work done, like don't cry, don't stop being a bitch, right? Like,
Mhm.
and there's definitely value in that. Like I'm a product of that, you're a product of that, and I think that gives you a certain level of grit. But yeah, taken too far, right? That's an issue, right? It can be a really big issue. So I think the world is made up of ratios. It's like, where in that spectrum does it land? At a certain point, it's unhealthy, right? And you have to go through a process of unwinding that. So, what is next for you? Because I think that's really important. So what kind of future are you looking for or towards?
That's a good question. I've been thinking about this the last month or so. So keep doing the podcast. Probably start doing a little more stand up again.
Okay.
Just touring with my co-host Shane. Probably, that would be kind of fun, and that would be cool doing that. So that's one aspect. So I have it broken down into 3 areas. So I have the comedy, doing stand up, doing the podcast. That's right now like the mother business. That's what's kind of keeping everything afloat.
Yep.
And then I'm going to launch a psychoeducational. So I want to come up with an idea for mental health care that can kind of get around the whole idea of like relying on insurance companies for exactly what we were talking about. Everyone I go to school with is like, oh man, it's like all these big like nonprofits all take these companies' money who just have a ton of money, and like they're all beholden to these companies. It's like, yeah, dude, like why don't you use your money then if you have such a problem with it?
Right.
Which nobody ever does. They like to just complain. So I'm like, and I would like the idea of having some kind of something that could help people kind of adjust their thoughts and feelings in a way that would be meaningful and would work for them. You could call it therapy, you can call it counseling, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
But I feel like it was just like, we have like the medical model of psychiatry, and then there's like religion, which was like an only other thing people could rely on. So I'd like to kind of take the best of both worlds and kind of come up with like a decentralized like AA type network that's kind of based on cutting edge research and all of the, like the different theories of therapy that I find are the most like clinically useful, and then build a psychoeducational podcast that kind of like teaches people about themselves and their mind, and then have with that an online community of people getting therapy in group settings where it's not even therapy. People will just be discussing issues in their life, getting honest feedback from other people. And then you can do it online or in person, and just coming up with an option that would be like affordable and also clinically effective. So that's my other project along with the other podcast. And then I'm starting another thing. And this is kind of like more of a joke. It's kind of like a joke religion, the Church of Sacred Dogology, where I'm going to be honestly helping people try to reach transcendental states, but also like having a good time and not making it too weird or rigid or anything. So that'll be, they're my 3 areas right now.
Well, I say this, and I know you're going to reject this compliment, but we need more of people like you, right? Like in certain fields, right? Like psychology and so on. Like you straddle the line of getting stuff done, and your results have already shown it. And also not taking yourself too seriously. And that hybrid is awesome, right?
Thanks,
because it opens it opens these conversations up to be digestible for a whole audience that would have never, ever, ever had these conversations before. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing what you develop in sort of like the psychology world, and getting people to think about their thoughts and so on. And it's awesome to be sitting in a space where now, because of the internet, like you can actually reach, like you already have, like, I mean, if you had to think of how many people have heard your voice and your message via your podcast, if you had to think about the number of people, it's astronomical.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, man. I mean,
all over the world.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it's like a country. It's like a small country's worth of people.
Yeah.
Over historic. If you talk about historic or not even the amount
yeah.
of people, because people repeat download, but it's a lot of people. It's pretty wild to think about how many, you get into the numbers of it, is like, holy shit, it's crazy.
Yeah. But what I appreciate about what you do is that, you're using that as a platform. And for anybody who wants to listen to your opinions on other stuff, and typically I don't like when celebrities do that. Like when they'll go out and they'll comment about stuff. It's like, look, you don't even read about the stuff that you're commenting on. You're just using your platform and you have an emotional response to whatever it would be, about politics or about whatever it is, and you'll go on. But the thing that probably most people know about you is you actually like read and study tremendously on this. And you, just because you're not out prancing around, I mean, you're getting your master's degree right now. Like though, and you and I have talked for years, over a decade, about all the stuff that we read together. And so the more people need to have people like you who are approachable and can deliver it in a funny way, or deliver it in an entertaining way, or at least start the conversations like that. Yeah, man, it's awesome. So the compliment that you gave me, and you probably don't remember this, the very first compliment you gave me, the first week that we met, when we were teenagers, was you said, "Hey man, like you seem like you're a really well-rounded dude," and really that's not because of me, it's because of my mom, and she kind of trained me. But you, sir, are the same. Like, you're even more so, right? Like we need more people like you who don't just sit in one little compartment, who are willing to go out and, and go on the circumference of knowledge in every area that you're interested in, and really go deep into all those areas. Because let's be real, we have the time to do that. Anybody who tells themselves they don't have the time, it's just a lie. It's a complete lie. So it's cool to see you doing it, man.
I appreciate that, and I still mean it. And I've always was blown away by the fact that you are like when people can say like, oh, you're too logical to this. When you do all your goal setting things, there's always stuff like family. There's always, so it's like you take everything into consideration, which I've always really liked. And yeah, and I've always admired that. And also I would say your conscientiousness is probably in the 100th percentile in terms of like, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do it now, and then it just happens. Where I'm on like a 4-year lag in terms of things I say I'm going to do. So it's like I do them, but they take like a really long time. But so I've always really, really admired that. And it's something, you're one of the, I would say, mental objects. People have like the WWJDs on their bracelets. Yeah. I have several WW peoples, and I'm like, you're definitely one where I'll catch myself. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, no. Or yes, or yes. So it's like, and that's in a very good way. But yeah, I think people at the end of the day need to just take stock of the fact that, just go to your worst case scenario. And I like to think of myself as I'm just an animal out in nature. And it's like, all I got to do is eat and sleep somewhere. And all the other stuff I worry about is, obviously relational stuff's important. But like, don't be scared to like go explore stuff and go do stuff and fail. You're not going to die. You'll be fine.
Yeah, so. No, man, it's a solid message. And I think the brilliance is in the simplicity. Where can people find you, dude?
Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast. And then I'm on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at MS Secret Pod, and I'm on Instagram at McCusker Matthew J.
Awesome, brother. I'm looking forward to all of our usual antics, goal setting, all that kind of stuff, man. I really appreciate it.
Dude, please, man. Thank you.
All right, brother.
All right, man.
All right, see ya.
Later.